What would a millionaire discover by secretly following his cleaner to an abandoned warehouse? The truth, revealed by her own children, would change his life forever. The rain hammered against the windows of the 50th floor of the city's tallest corporate skyscraper in the Sydney CBD. Lachlan Lachi Sterling, his hands shaking, held the financial report that had just changed everything. The numbers didn't lie. Someone had been stealing from his company, and suspicion pointed directly to the cleaning department. Impossible, he muttered, as his eyes scanned every line of the document. For years, he had blindly trusted his cleaning staff, especially Clara. The quiet woman always worked late, often when he was still in the office. But the facts were irrefutable. Costly supplies were missing, specialized cleaning products that only the night staff had access to. The private investigator he had hired weeks ago had finally delivered his preliminary report. Security cameras showed suspicious movements, silhouettes carrying boxes after hours. Lucky felt as if his heart had been ripped out. How was it possible that the person he trusted the most, the only employee who knew the most private corners of his office, could betray him this way? That night, as Clara finished her cleaning routine, Lachi remained hidden in his office with the lights off. Through the crack in the door, he watched every move of the woman who had cleaned his space for over 3 years. Her movements were the same as always, meticulous, respectful, almost reverent with every object she touched. But then something happened that froze his blood. Clara headed towards the supply cupboard with a key she definitely shouldn't possess. Lachi watched as she took out several industrial cleaning products, specialized disinfectants, and other expensive items, carefully placing them in a large duffel bag. His heart shattered into 1,000 pieces upon confirming his worst fears. "I can't believe it," he whispered to himself, feeling the betrayal burn his chest like acid. For years, he had been generous with his staff, paid fair wages, and offered bonuses on special occasions. Why would Clara do this? Why risk everything for a few cleaning products? When Clara finished and headed toward the lift, Lachi made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't call the police. He wouldn't confront the woman immediately. He needed to understand why. He needed to know what had driven her to become a thief. Silently, Lachi followed Clara to the car park. From his black Mercedes-Benz S-Class, he kept a prudent distance as the old urban bus pulled away through the wet city streets. His heart pounded with a mixture of anger and disappointment he had never experienced. This woman had violated his trust in the vilest way possible. The bus made several stops before Clara descended in an outer suburb estate Lachi had never visited. It was an area where the streets weren't fully paved, where the houses looked cobbled together from different materials, where the scent of struggle was in every corner. Lachi continued to keep his distance, his Mercedes completely out of place with the surroundings. Clara walked for 20 more minutes, carrying the bag containing the stolen products. Lachi followed on foot, keeping to the shadows, feeling his anger grow with every step. Why did she need so much disinfectant? Did she have a parallel business selling cleaning products? The idea that he had inadvertently been financing a criminal operation turned his stomach. Finally, Clara stopped in front of a structure that left Lachi speechless. It wasn't a house, but a dilapidated warehouse shell with cracked walls, broken windows covered with cardboard, and a roof that had clearly seen better days. The place looked ready to collapse, yet Clara headed towards the main door as if it were her home. What is this place? Lachlan wondered, feeling confusion gradually replace his anger. This didn't look like a professional thief's hideout. It looked more like the refuge of someone desperate. Clara opened the door and disappeared inside. Lachi waited a few minutes before cautiously approaching. The covered windows didn't allow him to see anything, but he could hear voices inside. Voices that completely paralyzed him. They were children's voices. "Mum, you're here," he heard a cheerful child's voice say. "Finn has been coughing all night, and Ruby has a bad temperature." Lachi felt as if he had been punched in the chest. Children. Clara had children living in that place. His mind slowly began to process a reality he hadn't considered. The cleaning products, the specialized disinfectants. What if she wasn't stealing them to sell? He moved closer to one of the windows that had a small hole in the covering cardboard. What he saw through that small opening changed everything he thought he knew about Clara Davies. Inside that abandoned shell, lit only by candles, were 3 children. A teenager who seemed to be looking after 2 younger ones, one of whom was clearly unwell. Clara had taken out the cleaning products and was meticulously disinfecting every surface, every corner of that precarious dwelling. Her movements were the same ones Lachi had observed in his office. Careful, methodical, filled with a love he now completely understood. "Come here, Mate," he heard Clara say to the smallest child. "We need to clear up that cough. I can't lose you too." Lachi stumbled back, feeling tears begin to well up in his eyes. Two? What did that mean? His heart broke as he realized he had completely misjudged this woman. She wasn't stealing out of greed or malice. She was stealing to survive, to keep her children alive in conditions no human being should face. But then a broken child's voice cut through the night like a dagger. "Mom, is Dad ever coming back? Is he coming to help us, like he promised before he went to heaven?" The silence that followed was more devastating than any scream. Lucky understood in that moment that this woman was fighting not only poverty, but also the loss of someone very important. And while he had been worrying about a few cleaning products, she had been fighting an epic battle to keep her family alive. Lucky remained motionless for several minutes, processing the devastating reality he had just discovered. His legs trembled as he silently moved away from the window, his mind struggling to comprehend how he had been so blind to the suffering of one of his most dedicated employees. He returned to his Mercedes with a broken heart, but he couldn't start the engine. His hands were shaking so much that he couldn't insert the key. The boy's words kept echoing in his head like a painful refrain. Is Dad ever coming back? The innocence of that question, the desperate hope in that child's voice, had hit him harder than any business news he had ever received. He sat there watching that dilapidated warehouse where a single mother struggled to keep her 3 children alive. Through the cracks in the walls, he could see the faint light of the candles moving, creating dancing shadows that seemed to tell a story of resilience and unbreakable love. "My God, what have I done?" Lachlan murmured, burying his face in his hands. For weeks, he had been planning to fire Clara. He had considered pressing charges for theft. He had allowed distrust to poison every interaction with her. And all this time, she had been using those products to create a clean, safe environment for her sick children. He then remembered all the times he had seen Clara working late, always with a dedication he had found admirable, but which he now completely understood. Every extra minute she spent in the office meant additional money for her family. It meant one more opportunity to bring home the necessary resources to sustain her children. Suddenly, he heard voices coming from inside the structure. It sounded like some kind of crisis was developing. Lucky silently got out of the car and approached the window again, his heart pounding with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mum, Finn can't breathe properly," he heard a small girl's voice say, filled with panic. "He's going blue, and he's making funny noises when he tries to take a breath." Lachi saw Clara moving frantically inside the room, holding the smallest child while trying to calm him. The scene unfolding before his eyes was heartbreaking, a desperate mother trying to save her son with extremely limited resources. "Riley, bring the steamer we made with the pot," Clara ordered in a trembling but firm voice. "Ruby, help me hold your little brother while we give him the steam. We'll get him through this, my love. Mum won't let anything bad happen to you." Lucky watched, fascinated, as the family improvised medical solutions with basic elements. Riley, the eldest son, moved a pot of hot water near the small boy, creating a makeshift vaporizer while his sister held the baby's head. Their coordination spoke of a routine established by necessity, of siblings who had learned to care for each other in impossible circumstances. "Why does Finn get sick so much, Mum?" Ruby asked, with that brutal honesty only children possess. "Is it because we live here? Is it because we don't have proper heating like my school friends' houses?" The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Lucky watched as Clara fought to hold back tears, while she continued to apply the improvised steam to her youngest son's airways. The girl's question had touched upon a devastating truth that everyone in that family knew, but no one dared to fully verbalize. "My love," Clara finally replied, her voice breaking. "Sometimes life gives us very hard tests, but the important thing is that we have each other, and Mum will do everything possible to make sure you're okay. Dad is watching over us from heaven, and he wants us to be strong." Lucky felt the tears begin to roll down his cheeks. The strength of this woman, her ability to maintain hope in such desperate circumstances, moved him in a way he had never experienced. All his life, he had been surrounded by luxury, by comfort, by immediate solutions to any problem. He had never faced the reality of having to choose between buying medicine for a sick child or paying for decent housing. "Mum," Riley said with a maturity that tore at the heart, "I'm not going to school tomorrow. I'm going to stay home to look after Finn and Ruby while you work. Besides, I heard that the central market needs help loading boxes. Can I earn some extra cash?" "No, Matt," Clara replied firmly, although her voice trembled with emotion. "Your education is the most important thing. It's the only way you can have a different life than mine one day." I won't allow you to sacrifice your future for our current situation. But Mum, we need the money, Riley insisted. And also, if Finn gets worse, someone has to be here to take him to the public hospital. You can't miss work because we need that paycheck. Lockie realized he was witnessing a conversation that constantly repeated itself in that family. The terrible choice between immediate survival and future hope. Every day, Clara had to choose between caring for her sick children or keeping the job that kept them alive. And her children, just kids, were already taking on responsibilities meant for adults. Listen to me carefully, Clara said, pulling her 3 children toward her in a collective hug that Lockie could clearly see through the window. I know the situation is very hard right now. I know you're cold, that Finn is sick, that sometimes there isn't enough food, but I promise you that this will change. Mum is working very hard to get us a better place to live. Really, Mum? Ruby asked, with those bright eyes full of childlike hope. We'll have a house with heating, and Finn will be able to breathe better? Yes, my love, Clara replied. Although Lachi could detect the uncertainty behind that promise. We're going to have a proper home, with rooms for everyone, with hot water, with everything you deserve. Lachi felt his heart break as he realized that Clara was making promises she likely couldn't keep. With her cleaner's salary, even working overtime, it would be almost impossible for her to get her family out of that situation. And yet, she continued to feed her children's hope, because it was the only thing that kept them united and willing to fight. It was then that he heard something that completely changed his perspective on the whole situation. Riley, Clara said in a low voice, believing the younger children couldn't hear. I need you to know something important about the job at Mr. Sterling's company. Lately, I've had to take a few things from the office, cleaning products, disinfectants. I know it's wrong, but with Finn so sick and no money to buy medicine. Mum, you don't have to explain anything to me, Riley interrupted with a wisdom that didn't match his years. You always do the right thing. If you took those things, it was because you had no other choice. Dad always said that when it comes to protecting family, a parent does whatever it takes. Lockie gasped for breath. Clara was confessing to her eldest son that she had been taking products from the office, but the way she did it was not that of a criminal justifying her actions. It was that of a desperate mother, explaining to her son why she had had to compromise her own moral values to keep them alive. But son, Clara continued, tears in her eyes, I want you to understand that this is not what I want to teach you. Under normal circumstances, I would never take something that doesn't belong to me. Your dad was an honest, hard-working man, and he wanted you to grow up to be people of integrity. What I'm doing now is just until we find a solution. Mum, Dad would do the same if he were here, Riley responded, hugging his mother. He taught us that the most important thing is to look after family, and you are doing exactly that. Lachi had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. The conversation he had just overheard impacted him more deeply than any previous experience in his life. This woman had been tortured by the guilt of taking those products. She had been teaching her children that what she was doing was not right, but that sometimes extreme circumstances forced people to make impossible decisions. Suddenly, Finn began to cough violently, a wet and worrying sound that immediately mobilized the entire family. Lachi saw Clara hold the small child, while Riley and Ruby ran to bring more hot water for the improvised vaporizer. Finn, my love, easy, Clara whispered while rocking the child. Mum's here. Everything will be okay. Breathe slowly, just like I taught you. But Lachi could see that the situation was worsening. The child's lips had a bluish tint that was definitely not normal, and his breathing was becoming increasingly labored. It was evident he needed urgent professional medical attention. Mum, Riley said, panic growing in his voice, I think we have to take him to the hospital. He's getting worse. My son, you know we don't have money for the private hospital, Clara responded desperately. And at the public hospital, they'll take hours to see us. Besides, they'll ask us a lot of questions about where we live, about our situation. Lachi realized that Clara was afraid to seek medical help, not only for economic reasons, but also because she feared the authorities would find out about the conditions in which she was raising her children. The fear of having her children taken away due to neglect or unsuitable living conditions was paralyzing her just when she most needed to act. Mom, I don't care what they say, Riley insisted. If Finn suffers because we didn't take him to the hospital, I'll never forgive myself, and neither will you. Those words were like a stab for Lachi. A 1-2-year-old boy was facing the real possibility of losing his younger brother due to lack of medical resources. He was watching a family tear itself apart between love, fear, and desperation. Clara finally made a decision that demonstrated the true magnitude of her maternal love. "You're right, my son," she said with determination, wrapping Finn in a worn blanket. "We're going to the public hospital. I don't care what we have to face afterwards. The important thing now is to save your little brother." Lachi watched them leave the abandoned warehouse in the early morning. A silent procession of figures wrapped in ragged blankets walking through the rain towards a distant bus stop. Clara carried Finn while Riley held Ruby's hand, and all of them moved with the desperate urgency of those who know that every minute counts. It was in that moment that Lachlan Sterling made the most important decision of his life. He couldn't stand there, passively observing while this family struggled to survive. He couldn't return to his warm, comfortable mansion, knowing that just a few kilometers away, 3 innocent children were paying the price of circumstances completely outside their control. He ran to his Mercedes and started the engine. He had to do something. He had to help. But as he drove behind the bus carrying Clara's family towards the hospital, a question tormented him. How had he lived 45 years without realizing that this kind of suffering existed so close to him? And more importantly, what kind of man had he become if he had been capable of judging a desperate mother without first trying to understand her story? The Royal Prince, Alfred RPA Emergency Department, seemed like a labyrinth of despair under the flickering fluorescent lights. Lachi arrived just a few minutes after Clara's family, parking his Mercedes in an area where it definitely stood out among the deteriorated vehicles and the ambulances that constantly came and went. From the main entrance, he could see Clara running towards the emergency counter with Finn in her arms, while Riley and Ruby followed closely. The small child had worsened during the bus ride. His breathing had become so labored that even from a distance, Lachi could see how he fought for every gasp of air. "Please, my son can't breathe," he heard Clara shout to the triage nurse, a middle-aged woman who seemed to have seen too much suffering to be surprised by anything. "He's been getting worse all night, and now he's turning blue. Please, you have to help him." The nurse, whose badge identified her as Carmen Rodriguez, looked at the child with a professional but understanding expression. However, her next words were like daggers to the heart of anyone who heard them. "Mom, I see that your son indeed needs immediate attention," Carmen said while quickly checking Finn's vital signs. "But I need you to complete these forms first. Personal information, address, Medicare details, payment method, forms," Clara interrupted with evident desperation in her voice. "My son is collapsing and you're asking me for forms. Please, treat him first, and then we'll complete all the paperwork you want." "I understand your concern, ma'am, but these are mandatory procedures," the nurse replied, with that institutional coldness that characterizes overloaded health systems. "Without complete documentation, we can't process his entry into the system." Lachi observed the scene from a prudent distance, feeling indignation grow in his chest. He was witnessing how bureaucracy could turn into a tragedy for those without resources. While Finn struggled to breathe, the system demanded that his mother prioritize paperwork over her son's life. "Mum, give her the papers she wants," Riley whispered, trying to be the responsible older brother that circumstances had forced him to become. "I can look after Ruby while you fill all that out." But when Clara began to complete the forms, the cruel reality of her situation became evident. She froze at the address box. What could she write? Abandoned warehouse with no number in the industrial estate? Wouldn't that raise suspicions about her capacity to care for her children? "Mom, I need a valid address," Nurse Carmen insisted, noting Clara's hesitation. "It's required information for the medical file." "Well, we're in the process of moving," Clara lied, her hands trembling as she held the pen. "We're temporarily staying with relatives." "The relative's address, then?" Carmen interrupted with increasing impatience. There was a line of people waiting behind Clara, and it was evident that the pressure of the job was affecting her patience. Lachi watched as Clara slowly crumbled. She was a proud woman who had worked all her life, who had maintained her dignity even in the most adverse circumstances. But now, with her son in critical condition in her arms, she was forced to lie and humiliate herself before a system that seemed designed to exclude the most vulnerable. It was then that Finn suddenly suffered a seizure. "My baby! Something is happening to my baby!" Clara screamed as the small child. Finn abruptly worsened, and the entire room froze. The convulsions were terrifying to witness. Finn's tiny body contracted violently while his eyes rolled completely white. Nurse Carmen finally reacted with the urgency the situation deserved from the beginning. "Code Blue in emergency. I need a doctor here immediately," she shouted as she took Finn from Clara's arms and ran towards the treatment rooms. "Don't take my son away," Clara sobbed, trying to follow the nurse. "Please let me be with him. He's just a baby. He's scared. Mom, you need to stay here while we stabilize the child, a security guard told her, blocking her path with that impersonal authority that characterizes those who apply regulations without considering the human pain they cause. Relatives cannot enter the treatment area during medical emergencies. Lucky witnessed Clara collapsing emotionally. This strong woman, who had faced poverty, widowhood, and the responsibility of raising 3 children alone, finally broke. She collapsed into one of the plastic chairs in the waiting room, crying with an intensity that would break the soul of anyone who heard her. "Mum, don't cry," Ruby told her, with that innocent wisdom of children who have seen too much suffering. "Finn is very strong. Remember, Dad always said our family has warrior blood. Finn is going to be okay because he has your strength." The 8-year-old girl's words revealed something fundamental about this family. They had lost their patriarch, but his legacy of strength was still alive in every one of its members. The father of these children had clearly been an important figure who had taught them values of resilience and family unity. "How did Dad die, Mum?" Riley asked in a broken voice, taking advantage of this vulnerable moment to ask a question he had evidently been suppressing for a long time. "You never told us exactly what happened." Lucky moved a little closer, undetected, because he sensed he was about to hear a fundamental truth to understand this family's situation. Clara took a deep breath before answering, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Your dad was a rigger in construction," she began in a trembling voice. "He worked on very tall buildings, building those steel structures that hold everything up. One day, the company he worked for decided to save money on safety measures. There weren't enough harnesses. The scaffolding was in bad shape. He fell?" Ruby asked, with that brutal directness only children can express. "Yes, my love," Clara confirmed, hugging her 2 older children. "He fell from the 20th floor because the company didn't want to invest in proper safety equipment. And when we tried to get them to help us, when we asked for compensation so we could keep going, they told us it was his fault for not being careful." Lachi felt his blood run cold. This family had not only lost their main provider, but they had been victims of corporate negligence. A company had prioritized profits over human life, and when the consequences of that decision turned fatal, they had blamed the victim. "Is that why we couldn't stay in our old house?" Riley asked, connecting the dots with that precocious intelligence that children who grow up in adversity develop. "Exactly, my son," Clara responded. "Without Dad's salary, we couldn't pay the rent. The landlord kicked us out after 2 months of arrears. We lost everything. The furniture, the family photos, even the toys Dad had bought you for Christmas." The image forming in Lucky's mind was devastating. This family had had a normal life, a house, stability. Everything had collapsed due to corporate greed and lack of social responsibility. Clara had gone from being the wife of a respected worker to a single mother struggling to keep her children alive in an abandoned warehouse. "But Mom," Ruby said with that unbreakable hope of childhood, "you always say Dad is watching over us from heaven. Do you think he's helping Finn right now?" "Of course, my love," Clara replied, finding strength in the faith that had kept her family together. "Dad would never abandon us. He's talking to the doctors right now, telling them exactly how to cure Finn." It was then that the doctor appeared, a young man who looked exhausted but maintained that professional serenity necessary to deliver medical news. Lachi moved close enough to hear everything he had to say. "Davy's family?" the doctor asked, consulting his clipboard. "Yes, I'm the mother," Clara responded, standing up immediately. "How is my son? Is he going to be okay?" "Your son, Finn, has a severe respiratory infection, complicated by malnutrition and prolonged exposure to adverse environmental conditions," the doctor explained, with that medical terminology that sounded terrifying to non-professional ears. "The seizures were caused by a lack of oxygen due to the obstruction of his airways." "What does that mean in simple words, doctor?" Riley asked, again assuming that adult role that didn't belong to his 12 years. "It means your little brother is very sick because he has been breathing contaminated air and hasn't received adequate nutrition to keep his immune system strong," the doctor explained, showing an empathy that contrasted with the bureaucratic coldness of other hospital staff. "He needs immediate hospitalization, intravenous antibiotics, and intensive care for at least a week." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any scream. Lucky watched as Clara slowly processed the implications of those words. Hospitalization meant expenses she could never cover. Intensive treatment meant she would have to miss work, losing the only income that kept her family alive. "Doctor," Clara said in a trembling voice, "how much is all that going to cost?" "Mom, right now the important thing is to save your son's life," the doctor replied, skillfully evading the financial question. The economic aspects can be discussed later with the billing department. But Clara had lived enough poverty to understand that discussing it later meant accumulating an impossible debt to pay off. It meant that for years she would be paying medical bills that would keep her in absolute misery. "Is there a less expensive alternative?" she asked, with the desperation of a mother drowning in a sea of impossibilities. "Something I can do at home? I know how to look after sick children. I've been doing it for months." "Mrs. Davies," the doctor said with firmness but understanding, "your son needs medical equipment that we only have here in the hospital. If you try to treat him at home, there is a very high probability that he won't survive. Are you willing to take that risk?" The question hung in the air like an emotional guillotine. Lachi watched as Clara fought internally between unconditional love for her son and the crushing reality of her economic situation. It was the cruelest decision any mother could face: go into lifelong debt to save her son, or risk losing him due to lack of resources. It was then that Lachlan Sterling made the decision that would change not only the life of the Davies family but also his own existence. He stepped out of the shadows where he had been observing and walked directly towards the group. "Excuse me, doctor," he said with that natural authority that money and power grant. "I am Lachlan Sterling, and I will take care of all the medical expenses for Finn Davies. I want him to receive the best treatment available, regardless of the cost." Clara turned toward him with an expression of absolute shock. Her eyes filled with confusion, hope, and terror simultaneously. She couldn't understand why her boss, the man she had been stealing cleaning products from, was standing in the emergency room of a public hospital, offering to pay for her son's treatment. "Mr. Sterling," Clara stammered. "What? How? Why are you here?" Lachi looked directly into her eyes, and in that gaze, there was a mixture of shame, admiration, and determination that Clara had never seen before. "Clara," he said in an emotional voice, "I've come to ask for your forgiveness." The silence in the emergency room became so dense that it seemed even the medical machines had stopped making noise. Clara looked at Lachi with an expression that combined shock, confusion, and pure terror. Her children had instinctively sought refuge behind her, not understanding why their boss had appeared out of nowhere at the most vulnerable moment of their lives. "Forgiveness?" Clara repeated in a voice barely audible, as if the words were stuck in her throat. "Mr. Sterling, I don't understand what's happening. How did you know we were here? Why do you want to help Finn?" Lachi took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would define not only the future of this family, but also the kind of man he would become from that moment on. "Clara, I need to confess something terrible," he began, his voice trembling with genuine emotion. "For weeks I've been investigating you. I believed you were stealing cleaning products from the office. I hired a private detective. I reviewed the security cameras. I spied on you as if you were a criminal." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she understood the magnitude of the situation. Her worst nightmare was coming true. She had been discovered. But what devastated her the most was not the fear of the consequences, but the shame of her children, hearing that their mother had been branded a thief. "Mom isn't a thief," Riley declared, with that protective fierceness that children develop when they see their parents being attacked. "My mom is the best person in the world. If she took those things, it was because we needed them, so we wouldn't get sicker." "I know, son," Lachi replied, addressing Riley directly with a respect that surprised everyone present. "And you're right, your mom isn't a thief. I was an idiot who didn't understand anything." "Is he going to put us in jail?" Ruby asked, with that heart-wrenching innocence of children who have learned too soon that the world can be cruel to the vulnerable. "No, my love," Lachi responded, kneeling down to the girl's height. "No one is going to jail, and no one is going to hurt your family ever again." The doctor, who had been listening to this entire conversation, discreetly cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but I need to know if you are authorizing immediate treatment for Finn. The boy needs to be moved to intensive care right now." "Authorize everything," Lachi ordered without hesitation. "The best available treatment, the best room, the best specialists. Money is no object." "Mr. Sterling," Clara interrupted, finding her voice despite the overwhelming situation. "I can't allow you to do this. I have no way to pay you back. With my cleaner's salary, it would take me my whole life to repay that money." "Clara," Lachi said, standing up and looking her directly in the eyes. "After what I've discovered tonight, after seeing how you've been living, after understanding why you were taking those products, the one who should be paying is me. I should be paying for having been so blind, so insensitive, so completely oblivious to the suffering that was happening right under my nose." "What do you mean by, after what you've discovered?" Clara asked, although a part of her feared the answer. Lachi looked down, ashamed to have to admit the extent to which he had violated his employee's privacy. I followed you to your place. I saw where you live. I saw how you look after your children. I saw how you use those products I thought you were stealing. Clara's expression changed from confusion to absolute horror. The idea that her boss had seen the deplorable conditions in which she was raising her children, that he had witnessed her greatest shame, filled her with a humiliation so profound that she felt physically sick. You saw the abandoned warehouse, she murmured, covering her face with her hands. You saw how we live. You saw that I don't have hot water, that there's no heating, that my children sleep on mattresses on the floor. I saw an extraordinary mother doing the impossible to keep her children alive, Lucky interrupted with a firm and emotional voice. I saw a woman taking cleaning products, not to sell them, but to disinfect a place where no one should live, but which she is turning into a safe home for her babies. That's not true. Clara exploded, the shame transforming into desperation. I'm a terrible mother. My children are living like animals because of me. Finn is here because I couldn't give him a decent home to breathe clean air. Don't say that, Riley shouted, hugging his mother with an intensity that surprised everyone. You are the best mum in the world. Dad always said you were stronger than 100 men put together. Riley is right, Ruby added, joining the family hug. Mum, you give us love every day. You make us feel safe. You teach us to be good. That's more important than having a nice house. Lucky watched this scene of unconditional love and realized he was witnessing something that he, despite all his wealth, had never experienced. These children didn't love their mother in spite of the poverty. They loved her precisely because she had sacrificed everything, even her dignity, to protect them. Clara, Lucky said with an emotion he had never allowed others to see. Do you know what moment impacted me the most from everything I saw last night? Clara looked up, unable to imagine what aspect of her misery had been most memorable for her boss. It was when I heard Finn asking if Dad was coming back from heaven, Lucky continued, his voice cracking slightly. And then, when I saw you confessing to Riley that you had taken those things from the office, I saw a woman tortured by guilt, teaching her children that what she was doing was wrong, but that sometimes extreme circumstances force us to compromise our values. Because it is wrong, Clara murmured. Stealing is wrong, regardless of the reason. You weren't stealing, Lachi exclaimed with a passion that surprised even the doctor, who had been listening to the entire conversation with growing fascination. You were taking disinfectant to clean the home of your sick children? You were using cleaning products to create the most hygienic environment possible, under impossible conditions. But they didn't belong to me, Clara insisted, clinging to the moral integrity that had been her guide throughout the crisis. You're right, Lucky admitted. They didn't belong to you, but you know what? They belonged to me. And if I had been a better boss, a better human being, I would have seen that one of my most dedicated employees was struggling to survive. I would have noticed that you arrived early and left late, not out of ambition, but out of economic desperation. The doctor finally intervened with renewed urgency. Excuse me, but we really need to move Finn immediately. His oxygen levels are dropping again. Go, doctor, Lucky ordered. Do whatever is necessary. I want medical reports every hour. As a gurney carried Finn towards intensive care, Clara collapsed in a chair, overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of the situation. Her two older children huddled beside her, forming that unbreakable family unit that had been their strength during the hardest months. Mr. Sterling, Clara said, after several minutes of silence. There's something you need to know. Something about why we ended up living in that abandoned warehouse. Lucky sat across from her, preparing to hear more details of a story that had already impacted him deeply. My husband, the children's dad, was named Darren, Clara began. Her voice acquired that nostalgic quality people have when they speak of lost loved ones. He was an industrial rigger. He worked on constructing skyscrapers and bridges. He was a good, hard-working man who dreamed of giving his children a better life than he had had. What happened to him? Lachi asked, although he sensed the answer would be painful. He was working on the construction of the new corporate complex, the Quay Precinct, Clara continued, not noticing the impact those words would have on Lachi. The construction company had decided to save money on safety equipment. The harnesses were in bad shape. The platforms didn't comply with regulations, but they were pressuring the workers to finish quickly. Lucky felt his blood run cold. The Quay Precinct was a project he knew very well. It had been one of his company's most lucrative contracts in recent years. Darren fell from the 18th floor because the work platform collapsed, Clara continued, now crying openly. When I tried to hold the company responsible, They told me it had been his negligence for not checking his equipment properly. They denied me any compensation and threatened to sue me if I kept insisting. What company was it? Lachi asked, although a part of him already knew the answer and desperately hoped to be wrong. Sterling Developments, Clara replied. Sterling Industries. The same company where I work now, cleaning the offices of the man whose company killed my husband. The silence that followed was so absolute that one could hear the hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights. Lachi felt as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. For years, Clara had been working for him, cleaning his office, knowing every detail of his professional life, while keeping the most devastating secret possible. Did you know who I was when you applied for the job? Lachi asked in a voice barely audible. Of course, I knew. Clara responded with a calmness that contrasted dramatically with the emotional storm in her eyes. I knew exactly who you were, the owner of the company that had killed my husband and then financially destroyed my life. Why? Lachi asked, completely overwhelmed. Why did you come to work for me? Why didn't you confront me? Why didn't you seek revenge? Clara looked at her two children, who had been listening to this revelation with expressions of growing shock and confusion. Because I needed the job, she replied simply. Because my children needed to eat. Because revenge wasn't going to bring Darren back to life, nor was it going to pay our bills. And because Darren always taught me that hate only poisons the one who feels it. But, I am responsible for your husband's death, Lachi stammered, tears streaming freely down his face. My company, my decisions about costs, my pressure to deliver projects quickly. Yes, Clara confirmed, with a serenity that was more devastating than any angry scream. You are responsible, but hating you wasn't going to feed my children. Working for you would. At that moment, Lachlan Sterling understood that he had been in the presence of a human greatness he could never achieve, regardless of how much money he accumulated or how much power he obtained. This woman had found the strength to work for the man responsible for her tragedy. She had maintained her professionalism and integrity while cleaning the office of the man who had destroyed her family. Clara, Lachi finally said, there are no words to express how sorry I am. There is no way to compensate for what my negligence caused your family. But I swear, on the lives of my own children, that I will dedicate the rest of my existence to mending this mistake. What exactly does that mean? Riley asked, with that natural distrust that children who have seen adults make unfulfilled promises develop. Lachi looked at the 2-year-old boy who had taken on adult responsibilities too soon and made the most important decision of his corporate life. It means your family will never again face hardship, he declared, with a determination that surprised even himself. It means you will have a decent home, complete education, guaranteed medical care, and everything your father wanted to give you when he worked on my projects. Why should we trust you? Ruby asked with that direct honesty of children. You already heard us once. Lachi knelt again to be at the height of the 8-year-old girl who had just asked him the most important question of his life. Why? He replied, his voice emotional. Your family has taught me tonight what it truly means to be human, and because I will never again allow my ignorance to cause so much suffering. The following hours in the hospital unfolded like an emotional roller coaster that no one in that waiting room would ever forget. Lachi remained there all morning, canceling important meetings, ignoring emergency calls from his company, completely absorbed in a reality he had never considered. The suffering of the people who worked for him. Every 30 minutes, the nurses came out with updates on Finn. The small child had been connected to multiple machines, his tiny body fighting an infection that had progressed more than initially thought. The doctors explained that weeks of living in unsanitary conditions had severely compromised his immune system. Mom, is Finn going to die? Ruby asked, with that childlike crudeness that cuts like a knife after seeing another doctor leave with a worried expression. No, my love, Clara responded, although Lachi could detect the uncertainty behind those words. Finn is strong like his dad. He's going to pull through. Lachi watched as this family faced the possibility of another devastating loss. They had already lost Darren. They had lost their home, their economic stability, their social dignity. The idea that they could also lose Finn was simply unbearable to contemplate. Mr. Sterling, Riley said suddenly, breaking the tense silence that had settled in the waiting room. Can I ask you a question? Of course, Lachi responded, surprised by the seriousness in the boy's voice. Do you have kids? The question hit Lachi like a punch to the stomach. Yes, he had children. 2 teenagers who lived in a mansion, attended expensive private schools, who had never faced a single real difficulty in their privileged lives, children who knew him more as a provider of money than as a present father. "Yes," he admitted in a low voice. "I have 2 children. Sebastian is 16 and Violet is 14. Do they know where you are now?" Riley continued, with that emotional intelligence that children who have seen too much develop. "No," Lachi confessed, realizing he hadn't even thought about contacting his own family to explain his absence. "They probably think I'm in a business meeting or traveling for work. As always, Ruby repeated with genuine curiosity. Lachi realized that these children, who had lost their father tragically, could not comprehend how someone could have healthy, living children, but choose to be absent from their lives. For them, who valued every family moment as a treasure, the idea of a father who prioritized work over family was completely incomprehensible. "My children are used to Dad not being home," Lachi explained, feeling growing shame as he verbalized this reality. "I've always thought my responsibility was to earn money to give them everything they needed. Big houses, expensive cars, holidays in Europe. But do you hug them?" Ruby asked, with that simplicity that goes straight to the heart of important things. "Do I hug them?" Lachi repeated, as if the question were in a foreign language. "Yes," the girl insisted. "We hug Mom every day, many times a day, especially when she's sad or worried. Do you hug your kids when they're sad?" Lachi remained silent for long minutes, processing a question that revealed a fundamental void in his family life. He couldn't remember the last time he had hugged Sebastian or Violet. Their interactions were limited to questions about school grades, money transfers for expenses, and superficial conversations during the few family dinners. "I don't think I hug them enough," he finally admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "Dad hugged us every day." Riley shared with a nostalgic smile that momentarily illuminated his tired face. "When he came home from work, before anything else happened, he hugged us. He said his children's hugs were what gave him the strength to work so hard. And on weekends," Ruby added, joining in the family memories, "Dad would invent games with us. He would turn the house into a castle, or a spaceship, or a jungle. We didn't need expensive toys because Dad made everything fun." Lachi listened to these descriptions and realized that Darren Davies, an industrial rigger with modest income, had been infinitely richer than him in the only things that truly mattered. He had had the unconditional love of his family, had built precious memories with his children, had been the emotional center of his home. "Do you know what we miss most about Dad?" Clara asked, joining the conversation with a soft voice but laden with emotion. "What?" Lachi asked, preparing for another lesson on what it truly meant to be a father. "The stories," Clara replied with a smile that mixed joy and sadness. Every night, Darren would invent different stories for the children. Stories where they were the heroes, where they overcame obstacles, where they learned important lessons about being good people. "He invented them?" Lachi asked, fascinated by a concept he had never considered. "Completely," Riley confirmed. "Dad said, the best stories were the ones that came from the heart, not from books. He would tell us adventures where Finn was a superhero who could fly, where Ruby was a princess who saved kingdoms, where I was an explorer who discovered new worlds. And always," Ruby added with growing enthusiasm, "at the end of every story, Dad would tell us that in real life, we were even more special than in the stories, because we were his real children." Lachi felt the tears begin to well up again. These children had lost a father who had not only loved them, but had invested time, creativity, and emotional energy in nurturing their imaginations, in making them feel valuable, in building their self-esteem day after day. "Have your children ever asked you to tell them stories?" Clara asked with genuine curiosity. "No," Lachi admitted. "They've always had TVs in their rooms, video games, computers. I never thought they might want something as simple as their dad telling them a story." "Maybe," Riley suggested with wisdom that far surpassed his age. "They don't know they can ask you. Maybe they're waiting for you to offer." At that precise moment, the head doctor of intensive care appeared in the waiting room. His expression was serious but not devastating, which immediately captured the attention of everyone present. "Davies family," he announced, consulting his clipboard. "I have news about Finn." Clara stood up so quickly that she almost lost her balance. Her hands trembled as she prepared to hear news that could change everything. "How is my baby, doctor?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Finn has responded very well to the antibiotic treatment," the doctor explained with a reassuring smile. "His breathing has stabilized considerably, and his blood oxygen levels are returning to normal parameters." The relief that swept over the family was so palpable that Lachi could feel it physically. Clara collapsed back into her chair, this time with pure gratitude, while Riley and Ruby hugged each other, crying with joy. "Does that mean he's going to be completely okay?" Ruby asked, needing absolute confirmation. "It means we have overcome the immediate crisis," the doctor continued. "However, Finn will need to remain hospitalized for at least 1 more week to ensure the infection is completely eliminated, and after discharge, he will require special care at home." "What kind of special care?" Clara asked, although Lachi suspected she already guessed where the conversation was heading. "Finn needs to live in an environment completely free of damp, mold, and air contamination," the doctor explained, with that professional seriousness that indicated there was no room for negotiation. "His lungs have been severely affected by prolonged exposure to inadequate environmental conditions. A relapse could be severe." The silence that followed was devastating. Everyone in that room knew that the abandoned warehouse where the Davies family lived did not remotely meet those medical requirements. In fact, it was exactly the type of environment that could put Finn at risk if he returned there. "Doctor," Lachi said, standing up with determination, "what kind of housing would be ideal for Finn's recovery?" "A house with adequate heating and ventilation systems, no damp issues, preferably with air purifiers, and definitely no exposure to mold or deteriorated building materials," the doctor replied, basically describing the complete opposite of where the family lived. "Understood," Lachi said firmly. "That won't be a problem." "Mr. Sterling," Clara interrupted, immediately understanding the implications of those words. "I can't allow you to do more than you already have. The hospital, the medications, it's too much." "Clara," Lachi responded, looking directly into her eyes, "your son almost died because my corporate negligence killed his father and forced you to live in conditions no human being should face. What I am offering is not charity, it is justice. But a house like the one the doctor describes must cost a fortune," Clara protested. "I can't accept something like that from you." "Why not?" Ruby asked with that simple logic of children. "If the gentleman has money, and we need a house, so Finn doesn't get sick, why can't he help us?" "Why, my love?" Clara explained patiently. "When someone gives you something very big, they might ask you for things in return later that maybe you can't give." Lachi felt those words hit him like a slap. Clara was right to be suspicious. In his corporate world, all favors came with strings attached. All help had hidden costs. All generosity was disguised investment. "Clara," Lachi said with an emotion he had never allowed others to see in professional contexts, "the only thing I want in return is the opportunity to be a better man than I have been so far. The opportunity to honor Darren's memory by doing for his children what he would have done if I hadn't been so irresponsible with workplace safety." "Really?" Riley asked, scrutinizing Lachi's face with that ability children have to detect sincerity or falsehood in adults. "Really," Lachi confirmed. "And I also want to ask you all a favor." "What favor?" Ruby asked with curiosity. "I want you to teach me how to be the kind of dad Darren was," Lachi said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I want to learn to tell stories to my children, to hug them when they're sad, to make them feel more important than any business meeting." "Seriously?" Clara asked, surprised by a request she could never have anticipated. "Seriously," Lachi confirmed. "You have lost the best father in the world, but your memories of him can help me become a better father to my own children. That would be the best payment you could give me." For the first time since this long night of revelations had begun, Clara smiled with genuine hope. "I think," she finally said, "that Darren would be very proud to know that his legacy is going to help another family find themselves." 3 days after the promise made in the hospital, Lachlan Sterling was standing in front of a beautiful 2-story house in the prestigious suburb of The Gardens, holding the keys in one hand and a purchase contract in the other. It hadn't been an impulsive decision. He had spent 72 hours meticulously researching every detail to find the perfect home for the Davies family. The house had everything the doctor had specified for Finn's recovery: a ducted heating and cooling system, air purifiers in every room, large windows that allowed abundant natural light, and most importantly, it had been built just 2 years ago, with materials completely free of damp and mold. But Lachi had gone beyond the medical requirements. The property had 4 spacious bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, a modern kitchen with new appliances, a backyard where the children could play safely, and it was located in an area with excellent public schools. It was exactly the kind of home Darren Davies would have dreamed of providing for his family. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Sterling?" asked Maria Elena Vega, the real estate agent who had handled the express purchase. "It's a very generous decision, but also a very costly one. This property is worth more than many people earn in 10 years. "I'm completely sure," Lachi replied without hesitation. Besides, it's not generosity, it's long overdue justice. While waiting for the arrival of the Davies family, Lachi reflected on the extraordinary changes that had occurred in his life during those 3 days. He had cancelled important meetings, delegated corporate decisions that he would normally consider crucial, and for the first time in years, he had put the needs of others above his own financial ambitions. More importantly, he had had the most honest conversation of his life with his own children. The night before, he had arrived at his mansion before 8 p.m. for the first time in months. Sebastian and Violet were dining alone in the main dining room, as was their usual routine, while he typically worked late or attended business events. "Dad," Violet had said, surprised to see him appear so early, "is everything okay at the company? We weren't expecting to see you until the weekend." Those words had broken his heart. His own children were surprised to see him home during the week, as if his paternal presence were an extraordinary event that only happened occasionally. "I need to tell you something very important," he had told them, sitting down with them for the first time in months. "And I need to ask for your forgiveness for the kind of father I've been until now." For the next 2 hours, he had told them the whole story. Clara, the abandoned warehouse, Finn in the hospital, Darren's death on one of his construction projects, and the devastating lesson on what it truly meant to be a present father. "Dad," Sebastian had said with a maturity that surprised him, "we know you work hard to give us a good life. We never felt like you didn't love us. But," Violet had added with that direct honesty she inherited from her mother, "we did feel like you don't really know us, as if you knew we existed, but didn't know who we are." Those words had been more impactful than any corporate criticism he had ever received. His children didn't blame him for working so hard, but they recognized that he had missed the opportunity to know them as individual people with dreams, fears, and unique personalities. "What can we do to change that?" he had asked them, genuinely interested in hearing their ideas. "Well," Violet had replied after thinking carefully, "you could start by asking us how our day was when you get home, not just if we did our homework or got good grades. And maybe," Sebastian had added, "you could tell us stories about when you were a kid. We never know anything about how you grew up, what you liked to do, how you met Mum." Lachi had promised that all of that would change, and had started that very night by telling them about his own childhood, about the mistakes he had made in prioritizing financial success over human relationships, and about how a family in crisis had taught him lessons no business school could offer. Now, standing in front of the Davies family's new home, Lachi felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement he hadn't experienced since he was a young entrepreneur building his first company. But this time, success would not be measured in economic profits, but in the smile of a mother who could finally give her children a decent home. The taxi stopped in front of the house exactly at 2 p.m., as agreed. Finn had been discharged from the hospital that morning, and although he still looked fragile, his cheeks had regained some of the healthy pink color of childhood. Clara got out of the vehicle first, followed by Riley, who carefully helped Finn alight, while Ruby immediately ran towards the front garden. "Mum, look how beautiful these roses are," Ruby shouted, pointing to the rose bushes decorating the entrance. "And there's a swing on that tree." "Ruby, don't touch anything," Clara warned automatically with the caution of someone who had learned not to expect too much from life. "This isn't our house. We're here to see it, but we don't know if—" "Clara," Lucky interrupted softly, approaching with the keys extended towards her. "This is your house, completely yours." The silence that followed was so deep that one could hear the wind moving the leaves of the tree where a swing was indeed installed. Clara looked at the keys as if they were magical objects that might disappear if she touched them. "What do you mean by completely ours?" Riley asked, with that protective distrust he had developed during months of uncertainty. "I mean," Lachi explained, kneeling down to the height of the 3 children, "that the house is completely paid for, that it is legally titled in your mum's name, and that no one can ever take it away from you." "Is it ours forever?" "Really forever?" Finn asked, with that small voice that still showed signs of his recent illness, but which shone with cautious hope. "Really forever," Lachi confirmed, feeling his eyes fill with tears at the expression of astonishment on the small child's face. Clara finally took the keys with trembling hands. For months, she had dreamed of this moment, but she had never believed it was possible. She had nighttime fantasies where she imagined her children running around a real house, sleeping in real beds, bathing with hot water, but she had always woken up in that abandoned warehouse, where reality brutally hit her. "Can we go in and see inside?" Ruby asked, practically jumping with excitement. "Of course," Lachi replied, leading the family towards the front door. "It's your home. You can do whatever you want." When Clara opened the door, What they found inside exceeded all the expectations they could have had. Lucky hadn't just bought the house. He had completely furnished it with everything necessary for a family with 3 children. In the main living room, there was a comfortable 3-seater sofa, a solid wood coffee table, a large-screen TV mounted on the wall, and most importantly, a bookshelf filled with children's and young adult books. The kitchen was fully equipped with new appliances, complete crockery, and the pantry was stocked with enough food for several weeks. "Mum, there's a staircase," Riley shouted, running towards the second floor like a normal 1-2-year-old boy for the first time in months. "And every room has its own bed," added Ruby, who had followed her older brother upstairs. Lachi had paid special attention to the bedrooms. The main bedroom had a queen-size bed with new bedding, a spacious wardrobe, and a chest of drawers with a mirror. The children's rooms were decorated appropriately for their ages. Riley's had a desk for studying and educational posters. Ruby's was painted in soft tones with a single bed decorated with new dolls. And Finn's had a convertible cot that could transform into a toddler bed, along with a special humidifier recommended by the doctors. "Mr. Sterling," Clara said, her voice broken by emotion. "This is too much. It's more than I ever dreamed of giving my children. I don't know how we'll ever be able to repay you." "Clara," Lachi responded, sitting next to her on the new sofa. "Do you remember what you told me at the hospital about why you decided to work for me instead of seeking revenge?" "Because revenge wasn't going to feed my children," Clara repeated, remembering her own words. "Exactly," Lucky continued. "Well, this house isn't revenge for what my company did to Darren. This house is my way of honoring his memory by making sure his children have the opportunities he wanted to give them." "Mum, come see my room," Finn shouted from upstairs, his voice filled with a joy they hadn't heard in months. When they went up to the second floor, they found the 3 children exploring their new rooms with expressions of pure astonishment. Finn had discovered that his bed had side rails to prevent falls, but which could also be removed when he was older. Ruby was hugging a new doll she had found on her bed. Riley was examining the books on his desk, books appropriate for his age and educational level. "Can I really keep all these books?" Riley asked, holding a natural science encyclopedia. "They're yours," Lachi confirmed. "And there are more books downstairs in the family library. I thought maybe you'd like to read stories to your siblings like your dad did." Riley's eyes filled with tears. For months, he had taken on adult responsibilities out of necessity, but now he was being offered the opportunity to be a big brother under normal circumstances, to look after Finn and Ruby out of love instead of desperation. "Mr. Sterling," Riley said with a moving seriousness, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do your children know what you're doing for us?" The question surprised Lachi because it revealed that Riley had been thinking not only about his own family, but about how these actions might affect other people. "Yes," Lachi replied. "I told them your whole story, and they know that you have taught me very important lessons about what it means to be a family." "What kind of lessons?" Ruby asked, joining the conversation with that natural curiosity of children. "They taught me that hugging children is more important than buying them expensive things," Lachi explained. "They taught me that telling stories at home is more valuable than working very late. They taught me that knowing my children's dreams is more important than making more money." "Are you going to start hugging your kids more?" Finn asked, with that direct innocence that only small children possess. "I already started," Lucky confirmed with a genuine smile. "Last night, I hugged Sebastian and Violet for the first time in months. And do you know what I discovered?" "What?" The 3 children asked in unison. "That they also needed those hugs, but they didn't know how to ask me for them." Clara, who had been listening to this conversation while exploring the main bathroom with its new shower and hot water, approached the group with tears running down her cheeks. "Mr. Sterling," she said with a voice full of emotion, "Darren would be very proud to know that his story is helping another family find themselves." "Do you really believe that?" Lachi asked, genuinely needing that confirmation. "Completely," Clara replied without hesitation. "Darren always said that tragedies only made sense if we turned them into opportunities for the world to be a little better." "Mum," Ruby said suddenly, "can we invite Mr. Sterling and his children to have dinner here someday so we can get to know them and maybe teach them some of the games Dad taught us?" The suggestion took Lachi completely by surprise. These children, who had lost so much, who had suffered so much due to his company's negligence, were now offering to share their new happiness with his family. It was a level of generosity and forgiveness that deeply moved him. "I'd love to," Lachi responded. "And I'm sure Sebastian and Violet would love to meet you too. Can we show them how Dad taught us to put on plays?" Ruby exclaimed, with growing enthusiasm. And Riley can tell them some of the stories Dad invented for us. And Finn can teach him his favorite songs," Riley added, holding his younger brother with that protective tenderness he had developed during the difficult months. Lachi watched this spontaneous planning of a family meeting and realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. These children were not thinking in terms of us versus them, or poor versus rich. They were thinking simply in terms of families that can help each other be happier. "There's one more thing I want to show you," Lachi said, directing the family towards the master bedroom window overlooking the backyard. In the yard, there was something that had taken days of special planning. A small raised garden bed with fertile soil, gardening tools appropriate for children, and seeds for vegetables and herbs the family could grow together. "Darren always wanted to teach his children to grow their own food," Lachi explained. "Clara told me in the hospital that he talked about having a garden where you could learn where real food comes from." "Dad told you that?" Riley asked, surprised that Lachi knew such intimate details about his father's dreams. "Your mum told me," Lachi clarified, "and I thought maybe you could teach me too. I've never planted anything in my life." "Yes," Finn shouted, clapping those small hands that already looked stronger after the medical treatment. "We can plant tomatoes and lettuce and carrots. And pretty flowers for Mum," Ruby added, always thinking of making her mother happy. Clara approached the window and looked at the garden with an expression that mixed gratitude, astonishment, and a deep melancholy. It was exactly what Darren had dreamed of for his family. And although he wasn't physically present to see it, his spirit and his values were completely alive in this moment. "Darren," she murmured softly, speaking to her deceased husband, as if he could hear her. "Our babies finally have the home you wanted to give them." Lachi realized he was witnessing a sacred moment, an instant where love transcends death, and where postponed dreams finally find realization. It wasn't just a house he was handing over. It was the materialization of the hopes of a father who had died too soon, but whose legacy would continue to live on in his children. "Clara," Lachi finally said, "there is one condition for this house." The instant panic that appeared in the woman's eyes broke his heart, but it was necessary to establish this specific condition. "What condition?" she asked in a trembling voice. "That you allow me to change all the workplace safety policies at Sterling Industries," Lachi replied with absolute seriousness. "That you help me implement protocols that guarantee no other worker suffers what Darren suffered, that you turn your husband's tragedy into the salvation of other workers." Clara looked at him for long seconds, processing the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Are you serious?" she finally asked. "Completely serious," Lachi confirmed. "I want Darren Davies to become the name of the strictest workplace safety program in the entire construction industry. For the first time since the loss of her husband, Clara felt that the tragedy that had destroyed her life would finally have a purpose that would honor Darren's memory in the most significant way possible. "I accept," she said in a firm voice. "I accept with all my heart." The first family dinner between the Sterling and Davies families took place a week after the house handover. Lachi arrived at 6 p.m. with Sebastian and Violet, bringing flowers for Clara and educational toys for the 3 children. His children had been nervous all day, not knowing what to expect from this family that had so profoundly transformed their father. The house that was once an impossible dream now overflowed with life and human warmth. The aroma of home-cooked food mixed with the sound of children's laughter, creating that atmosphere of a true home that no mansion could replicate. Finn had improved significantly. His cheeks had a healthy color, and his breathing was clear and strong. "Dad," Violet whispered as they walked towards the front door. "Are you nervous?" "A bit," Lachi admitted honestly, "but it's a good kind of nervous, like when you're about to experience something special." Clara opened the door with a radiant smile that contrasted dramatically with the desperate woman Lachi had seen in the hospital weeks ago. She wore a simple but clean dress, and there was something in her posture that spoke of recovered dignity. "Welcome to our home," she said with a genuine warmth that immediately put Sebastian and Violet at ease. The first few minutes were inevitably awkward. Sebastian and Violet, accustomed to formal dinners served by domestic staff, found themselves in a kitchen where the family itself prepared the food and where everyone was expected to participate in setting the table. "Do you need help with anything?" Sebastian asked, not knowing exactly how to offer assistance in an environment so different from his usual experience. "Of course," Riley replied with enthusiasm. "Can you help me take the plates to the table? In our family, everyone helps with everything." Violet watched, fascinated, as Ruby helped Finn wash his hands before eating, as Riley checked that everything was ready, as Clara coordinated the activities with an efficiency born of love rather than rigidity. It was a completely new type of family dynamic for her. The dinner consisted of simple but carefully prepared dishes, Chicken casserole, rice, vegetables, fresh salad from the garden they had started to cultivate, and homemade bread. There was nothing luxurious, but every bite had a flavor that spoke of time invested, attention paid, of food prepared as an act of love. In our family, Clara explained while serving the plates, we have a tradition for dinners. Each person shares something good that happened to them during the day and something they feel grateful for. Something good and something they feel grateful for? Violet repeated as if it were a completely foreign concept. Yes, Finn confirmed, with the contagious joy of small children. I always start because I'm the youngest. Something good that happened to me today was that I could run in the garden without getting tired, and I feel grateful because my chest doesn't hurt when I breathe anymore. The simplicity and depth of those words impacted Sebastian and Violet. This 5-year-old boy, who had been on the brink of a severe illness weeks ago, found joy in being able to breathe normally and run without pain. Their own daily worries about grades, video games, and social plans seemed trivial in comparison. I'm next, Ruby announced. Something good that happened to me was that I found a butterfly in our garden, and it stayed on my finger for a long time, and I feel grateful because I have my own room where I can keep all my treasures. What kind of treasures? Violet asked with genuine curiosity. Pretty stones I find in the garden, leaves with interesting shapes, drawings I make for Mum, Ruby explained seriously. Dad always said the most valuable treasures don't cost money, Riley continued. Something good that happened to me was that I completely understood my maths homework without help, and I feel grateful because I can study at my own desk without distracting noises. Clara smiled with maternal pride before speaking. Something good that happened to me today was seeing Finn playing happily in the garden, and I feel grateful because my children have a safe home where they can grow and dream. All eyes turned to Lucky, Sebastian, and Violet. It was their turn to participate in this family tradition, but none of them had ever reflected on their day in such an intentional way. We've never done this before, Lucky admitted honestly, but I want to try. Something good that happened to me today was seeing Finn smile when he ran to the door to greet us. And I feel grateful because you are teaching me how to be a better father. Sebastian hesitated before speaking. I think something good that happened to me was meeting Riley and realizing that there are people my age who are much more mature and responsible than I am. And I feel grateful because Dad is learning to spend more time with us. Violet was the pada. Something good that happened to me was seeing how Ruby looks after Finn. It made me think about how I can be a better older sister. And I feel grateful because this family is showing me what it truly means to love one another. The silence that followed was filled with warmth and connection. It was evident that something fundamental had begun to change in the dynamics of both families. Now, Riley announced with enthusiasm, it's time for stories. During the next hour, the Davies children shared the stories Darren used to tell them, but with a special twist. They invited Sebastian and Violet to be characters in the adventures. Ruby invented a story where Violet was a scientific princess who saved kingdoms with her experiments. Riley created an adventure where Sebastian was an explorer who discovered lost civilizations. Finn, with the help of his siblings, told a story where everyone was a superhero working together to make the world better. Lucky watched this interaction and realized that his children were experiencing something they had never had. The pure joy of shared imagination, of creating fantastic worlds with other children, of being valued not for what they possessed, but for who they were as people. Dad, Violet asked when the stories ended, could we do this at home too? The dinners with gratitude and the stories. I'd love that, Lucky responded, feeling more connected to his children than he had been in years. As the night progressed, the conversation became deeper. Clara told Sebastian and Violet about Darren, not as a tragic figure, but as a loving father who had filled their lives with joy and valuable lessons. What do you miss most about him? Sebastian asked with genuine curiosity. His laugh, Finn replied immediately. Dad laughed really loud when we played, and the whole house filled up with happiness. His bear hugs, Ruby added. He hugged us so tight that we felt like nothing bad could happen to us while we were in his arms. His advice, Riley said with the seriousness of someone who had had to grow up too fast. He always knew exactly what to tell us when we had problems or when we were confused. But do you know what's the most incredible thing? Clara added with a smile full of love. All those things we miss about Dad are still alive in you. Finn has his cheerful laugh. Ruby gives hugs that heal the heart. And Riley has that special wisdom to help others. Really? Finn asked with bright eyes. Completely true, his mother confirmed. Dad lives through you every day, This conversation had a profound impact on Sebastian and Violet. They realized that they had been taking their father's presence for granted, without appreciating the opportunities to create meaningful memories and connections while it was still possible. "Dad," Sebastian said later that night on the drive home, "could we start doing things together on weekends? Not expensive things, but things like Riley's dad did with them." "What kind of things do you have in mind?" Lucky asked, excited by this initiative from his son. "Maybe we could learn to cook together," Violet suggested. "Or do projects in the garden, or just sit down and chat without the TV or phones." "That sounds perfect," Lachi responded, feeling his heart fill with a happiness that no corporate success had been able to provide him. 3 weeks later, Lucky was in his office, but this time not working late. It was Friday afternoon, and he had established a new personal policy. No more work after 5 p.m. on Fridays, and weekends were sacred to the family. Clara had begun working as a workplace safety consultant for Sterling Industries, helping to design protocols that would protect other workers from tragedies like the one Darren had suffered. Her intimate knowledge of the human consequences of corporate negligence had made her a powerful voice for change. "Mr. Sterling," Clara said, entering his office with a folder full of documents, "I have the final report on the new safety measures for the Darren Davies Safety Protocol program. Over the past few weeks, they had worked together to implement the strictest workplace safety standards in the industry. The highest quality protective equipment, mandatory daily inspections, comprehensive training for all workers, and an emergency fund for the families of any employee injured on the job." "What are the results?" Lachi asked, although he already knew the answer from the weekly reports. "Zero workplace accidents across all our construction sites for the last 3 weeks, Clara reported with evident pride. "The workers say they feel safer and more valued than ever before." "Oh, and the financial impact?" "The initial costs were significant," Clara admitted, "but the savings in insurance, legal claims, and time lost due to accidents are already offsetting the investment. Furthermore, our reputation as a responsible company is attracting better workers and more prestigious contracts." Lucky smiled, remembering how he used to think that workplace safety was an unnecessary expense that reduced profits. Now he understood that it was an investment in human lives that also turned out to be an excellent business decision. "Clara," he said, closing the folder, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever feel like Darren would be proud of what we've achieved?" Clara smiled with that serenity she had developed during the months of healing. "Every day, especially when I see other workers returning safe and sound to their families, knowing that their children won't go through what mine did." "And your children, how are they adapting to all the changes?" "Finn is completely healthy. The doctors say there are no traces of the respiratory infection," Clara reported with maternal joy. "Ruby is flourishing in her new school. Her teachers say she is a brilliant and compassionate girl. And Riley? What about Riley?" "Riley surprises me every day," Clara continued proudly. "He has started talking about studying civil engineering when he grows up. He wants to design buildings that are completely safe for all workers." "Seriously?" "He says he wants to continue the work his dad started, and that you are helping to finish," Clara explained. "He wants the Davies name to be synonymous with safe construction." Lucky felt his eyes fill with tears. Darren's son had not only overcome the tragedy, but was transforming it into inspiration to dedicate his life to protecting others. "Clara," he finally said, "I want to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "I want to establish a university scholarship fund in Darren Davies' name," Lachi explained with growing enthusiasm. "For the children of construction workers who want to study engineering, architecture, or any career related to making the industry safer." "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. And I want you to manage that fund," Lachi continued. "Who better than Darren's widow to decide which young people deserve the opportunity to turn tragedies into solutions?" Clara was speechless for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what Lucky was proposing. "Do you know what this means?" she finally asked. "It means that Darren Davies will become a force for good that transcends his own death," Lachi replied. "It means his legacy will save lives for generations." "I accept," Clara said in a firm and emotional voice. "I accept with all my heart, and in Darren's name." That same night, in the house that now overflowed with life and happiness, the two families gathered again for dinner. But this time, there was an additional tradition. At the end of the meal, they lit a special candle in honor of Darren Davies. "Dad," Ruby said, addressing the candle as if Darren could hear her. "Today Mr. Lucky told us about the scholarships that are going to help other children study to make jobs safer. Are you proud of us?" At that moment, As if the universe wanted to respond to the little girl's question, a gentle breeze moved the curtains of the window, making the flame of the candle dance in a special way. "Dad is here," Finn whispered with that absolute certainty of small children. "He's telling us he is proud." Lachi watched this scene and realized he had witnessed the most extraordinary transformation of his life. A tragedy had been converted into redemption, an injustice had been transformed into justice, and a death had given life to a legacy that would protect countless future families. "Do you know what the most incredible thing about this whole story is?" Lachi said, looking at all the children present. "What?" they asked in unison. "That Darren Davies will never be just a name on a tombstone," Lachi explained with deep emotion. "He will be the name on university scholarships that help young people study. He will be the name on safety protocols that save lives. He will be the name that other workers remember when they return safely to their homes every night. And he will be the name that we carry with pride forever," Riley added, with that maturity he had developed through adversity transformed into purpose. "Exactly," Lachi confirmed. "Darren Davies has become immortal, not because he is physically with us, but because his love, his values, and his sacrifice continue to make the world better every day." At that moment, with two families united around a table, with a candle honoring the memory of a good man, and with the future shining with promises of lives saved and dreams fulfilled, everyone understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The death of Darren Davies had been a tragedy, but his legacy had become the most beautiful story of redemption, love, and hope that any of them could have imagined. And every time a worker returned safe and sound to their home, every time a young person received a scholarship to study, every time a family didn't have to suffer what the Davies family suffered, Darren Davies would continue to live, because true love never dies. It only transforms into increasingly beautiful ways of making the world better.